On today's episode of Locked On Oilers, could Patrick Kane become an Edmonton Oiler? What would it take and who would go the other way for Patrick Kane to come to Edmonton? All that and more on today's episode of Locked On Oilers.
You're Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to the Locked On Oilers podcast. I'm your host and former Oilers game day producer, Brett Holden. On today's episode, as mentioned, Patrick Kane could be on the trade block. I kind of alluded to it on yesterday's episode, but let's get into that. How could the Edmonton Oilers pry Patrick Kane out of Chicago? We will go through some potential trade targets for the Chicago Blackhawks, who they might want to pluck out of Edmonton. And then we will talk about the trade itself. What could a trade for Patrick Kane actually look like? Also on today's episode, Evan Bouchard changed his number to 2 today. So how did his season, his final season with number 75 go last season? We will get into his season report card as well today on today's episode of Locked On Oilers. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you find your podcast. Alrighty, well, let's get a little speculatory. Speculatory? I think that's the right word I'm looking for. Let's get speculatory today, as there hasn't been a lot of news around the Edmonton Oilers, so hey, that normally means Kenny Holland is a cookin'. No, I'm just kidding. But that normally leaves us fans on the sidelines going, all right, what now? Well, let's have some fun. A little bit of not necessarily rumors directly towards the Edmonton Oilers. Apparently there have been talks internally for the Edmonton Oilers to take a look at bringing in Patrick Kane. Obviously last year the Edmonton Oilers swung a deal with the Chicago Blackhawks as well to bring in Duncan Keith. So could the Edmonton Oilers be looking at something kind of similar to bring in Patrick Kane? Well, last year, when the Edmonton Oilers did trade for Duncan Keith, there were a little bit of a different circumstances around it when Duncan Keith was traded. It was because he wanted to be closer to Colton, his son. That's not necessarily a tie that Patrick Kane has with the Edmonton Oilers or with the western side of Canada in general, but also in the trade for Duncan Keith, Caleb Jones went the other way. Now, I know that sounds a little bit, so what? It's Caleb Jones. Well, Caleb Jones was then used as kind of a pawn for the Chicago Blackhawks to say, hey, Seth Jones, come on over as well. We have your brother. So it was something that kind of worked out for both teams. Something that both teams got something out of it. And obviously the Edmonton Oilers did get their veteran presence. And that's a little bit of a different situation for Patrick Kane. Now the Chicago Blackhawks are seemingly in a rebuild as Patrick Kane and I think Jonathan Toews, if I'm not mistaken, are currently their top 2 highest paid players. And I say mistakenly, or I may be mistaken, because after that, I'm pretty sure the next highest paid player on the Chicago Blackhawks, and you can fact check me on this, is Max Domi. So, a lot of investments going in different places. Now, seems like it's not the best place for Patrick Kane to be. So what would it take for the Edmonton Oilers to pry him out of Chicago? Well, obviously Chicago is in a little bit of a rebuild, so the younger players are the ones that are more likely to be sent off or come off the books in a trade like that. I have 3 prospects here from the Edmonton Oilers organization, and one could he be thrown in potentially that the Chicago Blackhawks could be looking at. The first name is Dmitry Samorukov, a guy who some people might have slated making the team this year. So Samorukov got caught into, some injury problems later on in the season and was unable to finish the season on the ice. He was able to come up with the Edmonton Oilers as the Black Aces in the playoffs, but again, only one of those Black Aces got any playing time, and that was Dylan Holloway, and that was less than 5 minutes. Or about 5 minutes. So, Dmitry Samorukov, kind of a tough season last year, did also get a couple minutes with the Edmonton Oilers. I believe he played against the St. Louis Blues in his NHL debut. Didn't go too well. Dave Tippett benched him immediately. So, a guy who has also been in some trade talks as well for the last couple of seasons for the Edmonton Oilers to pull off a potential big deal. Is this now the time? I mean, if the Edmonton Oilers are in for one of the best players in the last generation in Patrick Kane, then I think he probably could be. The next name is Raphael Lavoie, former Halifax Moosehead and now playing for the Bakersfield Condors. A guy who the Edmonton Oilers got in the second round of, I believe it was a 2020 draft, if I'm not mistaken as well. But a guy that some people had going in the first round of that draft. A little bit of a fall for Raphael Lavoie, some upside for him there, but he's still a work in progress. Raphael Lavoie played last year in Bakersfield as well. He's ended the season before last year as well in Bakersfield after spending some time in Major Junior as well. So he has some professional experience. I don't see him making the team this year. Maybe a potential call-up at some point for the Oilers, but that's not really where the Oilers are sitting with most of their players. They could see Raphael Lavoie as a bit of an expenditure there. The third name that I have for the Edmonton Oilers and some prospects that they could move out is one that I don't think a lot of people will like, but one that'll definitely move the needle in a move for Patrick Kane. And that's Xavier Bourgault. I think Xavier Bourgault would be a massive trade piece in any type of big trade that the Edmonton Oilers would look to make. He had a massive season last year in Major Junior with Shawinigan Cataract, and it could be somebody that a lot of teams around the league are upset that they didn't take at 20, or before the Edmonton Oilers did at 20, what was it, 2? Did they make that move there? So they moved back for with Minnesota, and that was when everybody was going, oh, why didn't they pick Jesper Volstad? Because they then picked Xavier Bourgault. So those are the three that I think could be brought up for sure in trade talks. The one that I was kind of maybe throw in there is Tyler Tullio. I like Tyler Tullio, plays for the Oshawa Generals in the OHL. A pretty decent prospect for the Edmonton Oilers. Just saw him in the Billy Moore's Cup, scored 2 goals in that. He's a decent prospect. I don't know exactly where he would be on other teams' boards, I guess, but could be a throw-in guy as well. Some other names as well. Warren Foegele has been a name that might be used for some cap space, and Tyson Barrie as well with a $4.5 million cap hit. If the Edmonton Oilers were to make a move for Patrick Kane, it would have to see some sort of salary or contract coming out, and I think Tyson Barrie makes the most sense. Shore up that defense for the Chicago Blackhawks down there, and then as well you get a contract in, contract out. Plus some picks as well that could be in play for the Edmonton Oilers. The 2023 first round pick, a second and third round pick, really, and next year's first round pick as well. I could see the Edmonton Oilers potentially moving in a move like this. So, what could the move look like? I have a couple of trade proposals to throw to you, and I want to know your thoughts. We will get into that in just a second, but first, from the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You've probably heard and tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar. Guess what? The friends at Built have given coconut brownie chunk the Puffs treatment. Yes, that is right. The coconut brownie chunk Built Bar flavor you love in a chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of brownie. I'm drooling. I am drooling. But you stop drooling and listen as well. They are good for you. Even though it doesn't sound like it, they are good for you. Low calorie, low sugar, high protein, and all delicious. All Built Bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently. I didn't know that. It also provides tons of health benefits. Eat something that is not only tasting good, but is good for you. Delicious coconut, rich, sweet brownie, creamy marshmallow. Oh my goodness, stop fantasizing. I think I'm drooling. My mouth is watering. Get to BuiltBar.com right now and order your box of coconut brownie chunk Built Puffs at this moment. While you're over at Built.com, make sure you use the promo code LOCKED15, that is LOCKED15, to get 15% off your next order. That is promo code LOCKED15, that is 15. Get 15% off your next order. Righty, as I move my notes around as I have whiteboards on whiteboards on whiteboards. But what would a trade for, I almost said Evander Kane. The Edmonton Oilers don't have to worry about that because they already have him. What would a trade for Patrick Kane look like for the Edmonton Oilers? Well, I just mentioned some potential targets for the Chicago Blackhawks. Let's put some of those targets into the mixing bowl and see what we get. Well, the first trade proposal I would send to Chicago if I was Ken Holland with more hair, I would say, hey, Tyson Barrie, appreciate what you've done. Great defenseman, but Chicago needs you. We appreciate you. Chicago needs you. I'd put in Tyson Barrie, Raphael Lavoie. I think very solid forward there. I think he's also a guy who might be ready to make a push for the NHL. And I think being on a team like Chicago, where basically, I mentioned a little while ago, a team here in Edmonton, FC Edmonton, they've been dubbed FC Opportunity. And I think that's what Chicago is kind of like. You get a guy into that system and give them the opportunity to play in the NHL. And I think Raphael Lavoie would really benefit from that. And the Chicago Blackhawks as well. On top of those two players, I think the Edmonton Oilers should include a 2023 first round pick, a 2023 third round pick, and a 2024 second round pick. Now, I know that sounds like a lot of picks, but you have to even look at the Zach Kassian trade. The Edmonton Oilers did toss in a couple extra picks just to throw Zach Kassian over to the Wolves, well, the Coyotes, I guess, and really have the Coyotes eat that contract. That's what it takes nowadays. You're not necessarily getting an entity in return for a draft pick. What you're getting in return is some sort of deal within a deal. And like they said, like you saw in the Zach Kassian deal, the Edmonton Oilers had to throw in an extra pick here in order for the Coyotes to go, okay, fine, we'll eat the entire salary. That's kind of the same mentality that's going into this Patrick Kane deal. The Edmonton Oilers, no matter what deal they make with the Chicago Blackhawks, all things considered, the Chicago Blackhawks are going to have to retain some sort of salary for this trade. So now you are not only trading for the entity of Patrick Kane, but you are trading for the idea of retaining some sort of salary. That in itself becomes an entity in the trade. So that's why I have 3 draft picks, a prospect, and Tyson Barrie going to the Chicago Blackhawks for Patrick Kane, and 40% of his salary retained. Now, that sounds like a lot. You can go up to 50%. The reason why I went 40% was, again, the Edmonton Oilers can chip in that extra top 3 round pick, or draft pick, I should say. And for Chicago to take that extra even 10% in salary retained, excuse me. That would mean with 40% salary retained, Patrick Kane would have a $6.26 million cap hit, which would mean the Edmonton Oilers would only be over the salary cap by $1.721 million. Now remember, the Edmonton Oilers have over $6 million in that little dead cap space that they can play with because of the LTIR with Oscar Klefbom and Mike Smith. So them being over by 1.72 million doesn't exactly hurt them too much. So that is the first proposal I have from the Edmonton Oilers: Tyson Barrie, Raphael Lavoie, a 2023 first round pick, a 2024 second round pick, and again in 2023 a third round pick. That is the first proposal for Patrick Kane. The second proposal I have: the Edmonton Oilers sending once again Tyson Barrie to the Chicago Blackhawks. Again, that's salary in, salary out. Then I'm throwing in another defenseman, and that is Dmitry Samorukov. I think Samorukov, again, a guy who should be playing in the NHL this year. I think now it's just over marinating the steak, I guess, for him to play in the AHL. He's ready to make the jump. And I think in Chicago, at FC Opportunity in Chicago, they should be able to have some space for him to play some sort of minutes in the NHL and for him to be effective. Then on top of Dmitry Samorukov, I have a 2023 first round pick and the 2024 first round pick. Now, in return, Patrick Kane to the Edmonton Oilers for only 30% of his salary retained. That is why it's not an extra pick. It's 2 first rounders, a prospect, and a contract in, contract out type deal. Because with that 30% retainment, Patrick Kane has a $7.31 million cap hit there. That's a little bit more palatable, I guess. That would mean the Edmonton Oilers have Evander Kane at a 5.125, McDavid at a 12.5, and Patrick Kane at a $7.31 million cap hit. That's a pretty solid cap hit for the first line, who would probably win the Stanley Cup. In that deal, the Edmonton Oilers would then go over the salary cap by $2.76 million. So again, that would be the penalty of not throwing in that extra pick for the retainment. You are going over the cap by an extra basically $1 million. But again, the Edmonton Oilers do have about $6 million in cap space to worry about extra, I guess, with the LTIR. So how do you think those deals would go over? Would you make that deal if you're Chicago? Would you make that deal if you're Edmonton? Again, if the Edmonton Oilers trade for Patrick Kane, their first line is Evander Kane, Connor McDavid, Patrick Kane. I saw people on the internet saying, oh no, the Edmonton Oilers don't need Patrick Kane. Why? Why? What are you talking about? Oh yeah, hey, I see all of these very shiny toys over here that you have on your team. You can have this other very shiny toy who's just as good and can really make all of your shiny toys that much better and probably win a cup. But nah, don't want him. Need defensemen. Need a defenseman. The people who are saying that the Edmonton Oilers absolutely need a defenseman are not people who cover the Edmonton Oilers or watch the Edmonton Oilers too closely. Now, if the Edmonton Oilers do trade Tyson Barrie in a trade for Patrick Kane, yes, then maybe they do. But you have to realize I can't even have two hands, where one hand, I would have to use two hands to count the amount of defensemen coming up to the Edmonton Oilers that could push for a roster spot on the Oilers next year. Marcus Niemelainen, Slater Cuckoo has been a name that has come back for the Edmonton Oilers. Philip Broberg's going to be in the lineup all year next year for the Edmonton Oilers as well. Vincent Desharnais is making a push for the Edmonton Oilers roster as well. Phil Kemp might have an outside shot. Michael Kesselring as well. There are tons of Edmonton Oilers prospects and guys that just straight up like a Slater Cuckoo who's been injured the last couple of years that can push for that spot. And the Edmonton, and if they don't trade Dmitry Samorukov, there's another one. The Edmonton Oilers need to get better in whichever way they can, and if that means that a Kyler Yamamoto has to go down to the second line instead of playing on the first line with Connor McDavid because Patrick Kane is there, then I think they're going to go, okay, yeah, you know what? We're going to make that deal. Really? Evander Kane, Connor McDavid, Patrick Kane, Zach Hyman, Leon Draisaitl, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Tyler Yamamoto even. Then you can have a third line center of Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and then you can have a fourth line center in Ryan McLeod. Then on that third line, you can have a Dylan Holloway, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and a Jesse Puljujärvi. Yes, please. Then on that fourth line, if you don't move Warren Foegele, you can have Foegele, McLeod, and Matthias Janmark. Those are four fantastic lines who can go out there, do a job, and score a goal no matter what. That's how you win hockey games. That's how you win a Stanley Cup, people. Depth. And that's what the Edmonton Oilers could have in a trade for Patrick Kane without even having to sell the farm. Pretty exciting, if you ask me. But speaking of that Edmonton Oilers defense, we are going to continue with our season report cards with a player who's making news, or today, I guess, not really massive news, but he's changing his number. Yes, Evan Bouchard is going from 75 to number 2 for the Edmonton Oilers. So, how did the newly crowned number 2 play last season? We will get into that in just a second. But first, who do you think are the top 50 players in the NFL right now? Well, which NFL stars are now moving up and down the betting lines the most? Starting July 18th, which is yesterday, so you better get caught up now. Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers over at BetOnline. Available July 18th on Locked On NFL, wherever you get your podcasts, and it's even on YouTube. Who do you think is going to be number 1? If I were to guess, I am going to say, it's probably going to be Tom Brady. Let's be real. Yeah, he's not even the best player in the league, but he will be number 1 for sure. Alrighty, I'm grabbing my notes for Evan Bouchard. A coming out season for Evan Bouchard, and rightfully so. Everybody said that this needs to be the season that Evan Bouchard steps up and becomes a defenseman everybody expects him to be. Well, he did. He did. In 81 games for the Edmonton Oilers for Evan Bouchard, 12 goals, 31 assists, 43 points for him. Very solid season, especially as a guy who started on that third pairing and kind of bounced between that second and third pairing. Thing about the Edmonton Oilers defenseman, it was very fluid throughout the season, especially after Jay Woodcroft came in, as the Edmonton Oilers then did become more of an 11-7 type and just more of a fluid hockey team. In the postseason as well for Evander Kane's on the mind for Evan Bouchard. 16 games played, 3 goals, 6 assists, 9 points for him there. Very solid output as well. Now, the thing about Evan Bouchard, especially and more specifically in the playoffs, his defensive play wasn't fantastic. However, the evolution of Evan Bouchard from even the start of the year, even from when Jay Woodcroft stepped in as head coach on February 10th to the final game against the Colorado Avalanche in that heartbreaker of a game, you could see the development of Evan Bouchard. He was getting into scrums. He was the first to step up for his teammates, and that is where he's really kind of become a leader in the locker room as well. Now, I know guys like Connor McDavid will say that he is a very important player on the team, but it's not only a leader on the team is not only for everybody. It is for the next people, the next younger players who are stepping in. And then guys like Dylan Holloway, a Dmitry Samorukov, enter player here, a Reed Schaefer, whoever Luka Munzenberger can come in and take a look and say, hey, Evan's been here for a year. I'm going to learn from him because he's been a pro. Even Philip Broberg as well. I know he's been around the team as well for last season more specifically, but Evan Bouchard is a guy who now has experience under his belt, a guy who understands his role and where he needs to be and what he needs to do. And for the younger players, that is a role model for them. That is, Evan Bouchard is a year into his career, and he's already showing leadership qualities. He was the captain of the London Knights before he became an Edmonton Oiler, so he has that leadership qualities. He has experience as a leader as well. Not saying he's going to be captain tomorrow, but I'm just saying the development of Evan Bouchard was apparent through the last season, and good on him. Now we're going to get into my favorite stats, the goals for and goals against per 60 minutes. Pretty decent for Evan Bouchard in all situations. He had a 3.27 goals for per 60 minutes, which was good for 11th, which was actually higher than Kyler Yamamoto on the Edmonton Oilers. In all situations, though, defensively, goals against per 60 minutes for Evan Bouchard is 3.08, which was 17th on the team, lower than Duncan Keith, Brett Kulak, and Chris Russell. So, especially comparing them to like-minded or defensemen, I guess, really not a fantastic season for him there. But again, the thing about goals against and goals for per 60 minutes in all situations is that it also takes the 5-on-5, it takes the power play, it takes a penalty kill, and especially when you take a look at the power play and penalty kill, those numbers are super inflated, so it's kind of tough to take a look at there. But again, those are still numbers of whether or not you're on the ice for goal for or goal against, and whether or not you can produce. At 5-on-5, Evan Bouchard can produce 2.83, goals for per 60 minutes for him, which was good for 10th on the team, higher than Kyler Yamamoto, but lower than Duncan Keith and Tyson Barrie, which I found interesting as well. 5-on-5, he had a 2.72 goals against per 60 minutes, which was 18th on the team. Not too fantastic, but you'll take a 2.82 and have him be 18th on the team any day, honestly. And then on the power play, an odd stat here. I was kind of shocked by this, but again, young player could come out differently. But on the power play, he had a 6.61 goals for per 60 minutes, which was good for 10th out of 13 players on the power play for the Edmonton Oilers. So that really needs to get better for Evan Bouchard if he's going to quarterback that power play. I know that also goes into account that he was mostly on the second unit for the Edmonton Oilers, but that does need to go up if the Edmonton Oilers and Evan Bouchard want to see success there. And then on the penalty kill as well, because he mostly then started becoming a penalty killer when Jay Woodcroft came in. Not a lot of trust instilled in Evan Bouchard from Dave Tippett defensively, but once Jay Woodcroft came in, he knew what he could do. And 7th on the team in goals against per 60 minutes on the PK, which was 7.13. Or a final grade for Evan Bouchard last season, a B+. Not bad. A good season for him. I really wanted to give him an A-, but there's still some development to be had from Evan Bouchard. But a great season nonetheless. Let's just ride this into next season as he changes to number 2, as mentioned at the start of the season, or start of the episode as well. He said that he wanted to change to number 2 at the start of last season, but then of course the Edmonton Oilers traded for Duncan Keith, and you're not going to go to Duncan Keith and say, so about that number 2. So he changes to number 2 today. Good for him. He finally is settling into the NHL. Also, just if you are on the YouTube, if you haven't made your way to YouTube and subscribe to YouTube as well, I'm also trying to show some love for the audio listeners. But if you are watching on YouTube, you may notice a couple different jerseys behind me. Again, I still have the Jack Campbell one from the Texas Stars from 2014 over my right shoulder, but you may have recognized a former Oiler, a fun little name, over my left shoulder here. That is Matthew Guérin. Got this bad boy at the Oilers locker room sale way back when. I loved Matthew Guérin. The last time I think an Edmonton Oilers goaltender wore number 32, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong there, but I loved Matthew Guérin. It's a goalie episode. How do we not talk about the goalies? You got Brizgalov up there, Guérin over here, and the newest Oiler, Jack Campbell, over here as well. But just thought I'd show a little of that, a little fun today. But either way, thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen every day. For your next listen, make sure you tune in to Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date in everything in the hockey world with Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. Alrighty, we shall call it there. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, sorry for coming to you a little later than normal. I had a meeting for my other job, just full transparency, a little earlier this morning, so that went a little longer than I would have thought. I had to prepare for this episode. I want to give you the most I possibly can. So we shall see you tomorrow on the Wednesday. I hope you have a wonderful Tuesday. Stay safe. Don't do anything I wouldn't do.